For today, as I said, this is what I'm going to focus on. So ये जो UGC regulations का महान मामला था जनवरी वाला is what we focus on, is what we slightly talk about. And I don't want to focus on the regulations per se, for a simple reason, because they have now been placed in abeyance by the Supreme Court of India. And court ने ये कहा है कि फिलहाल तो there would be no operation as far as these regulations are concerned. It seems that the government of India has been ordered to go back to the drawing board and to come up with regulations which would be more comprehensive, more inclusive, as compared to the ones which have created this trouble. Okay. So one part is we talk about how did we reach this situation? What is it that brought us to this situation? And the second part, which is slightly interesting, which not many people are interested in talking about, is why did it create the sort of troubles that it went about creating? So जिस किस्म का problem उसने create किया है, उस किस्म का problem उसने क्यों create किया? Okay. Which takes us to that very interesting sort of deviation about what is called as caste in Indian education. How exactly does caste work as far as contemporary Indian education is concerned? Because a lot of us have this fabulous idea that caste determined education in India in a slightly pre-modern sort of a situation. So in the period before modernity, most education in India was determined strictly in accordance with caste. Who obtained an education, who educated people, was somehow or the other something that was completely and very strictly related to caste. Okay, and sort of the general idea is we are far beyond it. वो शायद एक पुराना दुनिया है जो खत्म हो चुका है, and we are in a completely brand new world. How brand new would that be? As brand new as Galgotia's dog is. Anyway, so the brand new world का mascot जो है वो गलगोटिया का कुत्ता है. So we are in a completely different world, and that is the reason why we shouldn't be bothered and worried about these types of things. Whereas we should be very much worried and concerned about it, for a simple reason, because the debate around the regulations never took this factor into consideration. The Supreme Court never talked about it when the Supreme Court did. Not that you don't have, you have very elaborate figures in terms of how casteist is higher education in India. I'll be focusing mostly on higher education, though for some reason or the other, you can use the same sort of logic and reasoning as far as most education in India is concerned. तो अगर हम हायर एजुकेशन की बात करें और ये कहे कि वो कास्टिस्ट है, तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि ऑल एजुकेशन बिलो हायर एजुकेशन इज somehow or the other very caste free. No, that definitely is not what is meant by it. But definitely at the level of higher education, it sort of pinges in a very different manner. It sort of creates a completely different sort of a situation. And that's the reason why higher education is something that is talked of separately as compared to all other education. Higher education is most of the times the place where you go about creating the necessary human resource as far as modern industry and services are concerned. So for any modern economy, if you're looking at what's the quality of human resources which you can go about deploying, you're mostly worried and concerned about higher education rather than about education in general. And that's the reason why we most of the time keep talking and keep looking at higher education. You have elaborate figures for everything. You have vast amount of data. You practically have, and interestingly, you have all sorts of data. So you have data which has been generated by independent researchers. You have data which has been generated by government agencies. You have the UGC and the Ministry for Human Resources Development ka data. You have practically all sorts of data sets to dip into to understand as to how severe is this problem. And yet somehow or the other, when the Supreme Court placed this in abeyance, when the hearing on this case was completed, the Supreme Court did not take a look at anything of it. Okay, so where does it begin? 2012, the union government comes up, the UGC basically comes up with what were called as the guidelines related to discrimination as far as institutes of higher education in India are concerned. अब माना ये जाता है कि वो गाइडलाइंस एज कंपेयर टू दीज रेगुलेशंस ऑफ 2026 वर पॉसिबली स्लाइटली बेटर in terms of the fact that at least in letter and spirit they had a certain sort of a neutral tone when it came to addressing the problem of caste discrimination. Okay, the UGC regulations of 2026 try addressing discrimination across the board. So if you look at the wording of the regulations, if you look at the gist of it, if you look at everything, they are trying to address all sorts of discrimination. So they are trying to address discrimination by place of descent. They are trying to address discrimination on the basis of caste and community. They are trying to address discrimination taking into consideration the disability status of a person, the gender of a person, whole range of things. इतना comprehensive है, इतना universalist है. You are like sort of taken aback that they could do that good a job. So practically every single category by which a student in Institute of Higher Education in India can be discriminated against, the regulations practically go about placing on record every such category. So everybody's concerns sort of seem to be taken on board. That well, you cannot discriminate against anybody on the basis of caste, community, disability, place of descent. Practically nothing, absolutely nothing could be used to invoke a certain idea of discrimination against a person. Now, this is what was lacking in the 2012 guidelines. The 2012 guidelines were more or less very amorphous in the sense that they could talk about discrimination as pertains to everybody without addressing specificities. So 2012 का concern एक बहुत ही generalistic और बहुत ही universalistic idea of discrimination है, वो specificities को address नहीं कर रहा है. 2026 guidelines address specificities by taking the Indian higher education situation into consideration, wherein practically every single disability, every single sort of category under which you could be discriminated is named. Is like put in black and white with the whole idea that well, this is what will not be accepted. Okay, so they're like pretty clear about it. Now this is what created that whole problem कि सबको नेम तो किया है. इसका एक बहुत स्पेसिफिक किस्म का रेगुलेशंस का कैटेगरी है which is talking about caste discrimination. And at the point of caste discrimination, this very elaborate set of things almost collapsed. So caste discrimination it is talking about all sorts of caste discriminations, but it is particularly focusing on discrimination which is faced by historically disadvantaged caste communities in India, namely the scheduled caste, the scheduled tribes, and the other backward communities who have been mentioned in terms of socially and economically disadvantaged classes. So what it is doing is the sort of language of caste that we have come to normalize in India post 1989, once a Mandal Commission recommendations come into force, it's adopting that language. So वो caste discrimination की category में SCs, STs और OBCs के बारे में बात कर रहा है. वो ये कह रहा है कि no form of discrimination against anybody on the basis of caste would be accepted. But at the same time, it is laying a certain sort of specific emphasis on something that is called as discrimination as faced by the historically disadvantaged communities of India, namely the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and the other backward communities. And that is where the whole problem starts. Okay, so you have this whole mahal which has been created कि sir हो ये रहा है कि आप ये assume किए हो कि कास्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन खाली एससीज, एसटीज और ओबीसीज के खिलाफ होता है. ओके, नाउ व्हाई शुड दिस नैरेटिव बी पुश्ड फॉर in the absence of anything that is called as hard data beats all sorts of understanding. So practically every data set across the country is pointing out towards the fact that if you are in an institute of higher education and if you are being discriminated, the only situation in which you would be discriminated is you are a student from the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes or the OBC communities. Okay, I have not come across any data set. I do not know of any concrete example across the country where it is an upper caste candidate who has been discriminated against by lower category people. So मैंने ऐसा कोई भी केस नहीं देखा है, कम से कम मुझे एक भी मालूम नहीं है कि जिसमें आप अपर कास्ट से आते हो और आपके खिलाफ लोअर कास्ट वालों ने डिस्क्रिमिनेशन किया है, आपको रैक किया है, आपको ह्यूमिलिएट किया है, आपको बदनाम करने का कोशिश किया है. दे हैव इन सम वे और द अदर बीटन यू अप. दे हैव, वी डोंट हैव द लैंग्वेज फॉर इट. So if you are an upper caste person, and if say for example there's a group of lower caste people who wants to humiliate you, how do you humiliate upper caste people? Indian languages do not have any categories for the same. जैसे आप किसी निचली जात वाले को उसके जात की टर्म को यूज करके गालियां दे सकते हो, गाली गलौज कर सकते हो, उसको एक तरह से अपमानित कर सकते हो, ऐसा कोई कैटेगरी अपर कास्ट के लिए है ही नहीं. So I don't know, I've never come across that sort of a situation where an upper caste individual has been ragged against, has been humiliated, has been mistreated on the basis of his being upper caste. Okay. So you know this for sure that this doesn't happen in this country. And yet the entire baval that was created, very interestingly, was around this whole idea that, well, आज तक तो नहीं हुआ है, बात सही है क्या आपकी, पर अंडर द रेगुलेशंस शायद हो सकता है, फिर हम क्या करेंगे. अरे भाई, रेगुलेशंस उस चीज को एड्रेस करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं जो फिलहाल हो रहा है. Okay, the regulations are not addressing anything hypothetical, whereas everybody from the opposite side who is making this argument is basically talking about something which says this, that hypothetically आप सोचो अगर ऐसा हुआ तो. सर आप एक तो किस्सा दिखाओ कि ऐसा हुआ है, या लोगों ने ऐसा किया है, या लोग ऐसा करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. आप एक भी किस्सा नहीं दिखा सकते हो. And yet you have this very fabulous idea that the SCs, the STs and the OBCs of India are just waiting for these types of regulations to be made, so that what they can go about doing is they can hypothetically speaking go about filing up cases against the upper caste, by way of which they can go about misusing these regulations. Okay, so the whole idea is, this is a hypothetical argument which we are making, in which we believe that, you know, being empowered in the law in this manner, they can tomorrow go and misuse the law. And so what should be done is, you should not have the law at all. You have a problem on your hand, you are trying to address it by using the law. Okay, in the absence of which you just don't know as to how should this problem be addressed. And you have a very fabulous argument which has been made, which says this, that no, we should drop out the law, because the law can be hypothetically misused. Done. अब उनका इसके बारे में जो महान ख्याल है, given the fact that 8th of March is just behind me, are all the anti-dowry laws. So the whole idea is, just look at the way in which you went about making laws empowering women. And just look at the ways in which women are weaponizing those laws against men. So a whole slew of cases being thrown at your face of men having had committed suicides by leaving all those wonderful audio-visual records of how am I committing suicide because my wife has abused the law, my wife has troubled me, my wife along with her in-laws has put me into a certain sort of difficulty, and that's the reason why I believe the safest thing that I can do is I can go about killing myself. एकदम live streamed suicides है with complete testimonies available, and ये ऐसे वैसे suicide, ऐसे वैसे लोगों के suicides नहीं है. These are people who are earning in 5 digits, 6 digits, in some of the most urban spaces of the country. involved in the higher ends of the economy, finance and IT and all of that. And the whole idea that 4 साल शादी को हो गए, 5 साल शादी को हो गए, बीवी बहुत परेशान कर रही है. And the reason why she does this, the reason why she feels empowered to do this, is because the law is stacked against me. मैं एक गरीब बेचारा मर्द और मेरे खिलाफ मानो इस कानून ने पूरी कायनात खड़ी कर दी है, and I just don't have any defense against this. So the only thing I've been put into so much of trouble that the only thing left out for me is now to go ahead and commit suicide, which I'm duly doing, but I'm also recording my testimony about the same. This is what has been invoked to say that this is exactly what the lower caste people will go about doing once you go about creating the instrument of the law. Okay, so आप कर क्या रहे हो? आप instrument of the law create कर रहे हो, और एक बार आपने वो instrument of the law create किया, तो जिस तरह से लोगों ने एंटी डाउरी लॉस को मर्दों के खिलाफ इस्तेमाल किया है, you want to possibly have the same sort of a situation as far as the lower caste are concerned. Hence, what should be done is you shouldn't let the law be in existence in the first place. Just snuff out the law. But there were women who were being killed for dowry. Despite the fact that the law is in existence, dowry is an institution which has managed to undergo a certain sort of evolution in India. Dowry is a reality in India. Women are yet being harassed for the fact that either they have brought no dowry, or possibly they have not brought, exactly speaking, a very desirable dowry, or something like that. You yet have women being harassed. You yet have women being killed for all these types of problems as far as domestic settings are concerned. Okay, so not that, and this despite the fact that the law is in existence, to which they're always going to say, well, if the law is in existence and if it has not gone about protecting the subject of the law, it's better that you don't have a law. They're very smart at making those types of arguments. वो ऐसे ही इतने सालों से common law पढ़ नहीं रहे हैं, और वो पूरा वो जो tradition है of the Gandhis and the Nehrus and all of them of the world learning common law and trying to, in some way or the other, replicate it in the Indian context. They're not doing it for nothing. So I just don't know. Now, between 2012 and 2026, what changed along the way? You had two significant suicides. One is the suicide of the scheduled caste student called as Rohit Vemula, जो Central University Hyderabad वाला किस्सा है. And second is the suicide of this female student called as Payal Tadvi, who is a scheduled tribe student pursuing medicine in Mumbai Medicine College. And it's these two suicides which change the entire course as far as this entire discussion is concerned between 2012 and 2026. So if 2012 did not specify discrimination, did not specify categories of discrimination, did not specify forms of discrimination, okay, and 2026 does. The reason is along the way between 2012 to 2026, you have two very prominent suicides. ये prominent suicides hai, in the sense that they were rightfully called out. You had agitations around it. You had quite a groundswell of certain sort of a public sentiment around it. For a fairly long period of time, the agitations around these carried on. Okay, doesn't mean that these are the only two suicides that we know of. We know of tons of other suicides. These two are different for a simple reason, because ये काफी अरसे तक चलते रहे. इनके बारे में बात करना चलता रहा. इनके बारे में एक्शन जो था, and the state governments got into it. The state accepted the fact that there was a problem, and hence these suicides became slightly different. In the case of the other suicides, you normally had a tendency, as far as the state is concerned, to sort of push it into a corner wherein the element of social discrimination will not become prominent, or will possibly not be the only element that is cited. So we'll talk of so many other things. We'll talk of pressures as far as study is concerned. We'll talk of mental health issues. We'll talk of all sorts of things. We won't talk about something that is called as caste-based discrimination by placing it at the center of it. So as far as the other suicides are concerned, the state sort of learns its lessons, and what it goes about doing is don't categorize them into something that is called as caste-based discriminations until and unless it is not like absolutely necessary to do so. So you can talk about everything else. You can talk about mental health ka problem tha. He was under a lot of stress. There were so many problems as far as his private life is concerned. सब सारी चीजों के बारे में बात किया जाता है. Except one which says this, that he was possibly being the target of a certain amount of discrimination on the campus at the hands of both his peers and maybe his faculties for belonging to the caste community that he belonged to. Okay, so is it over in some form or the other? Definitely not. For people out there in the field who know their data far too well, we know this for sure that it is a persistent problem. 13,000 student deaths hai per year, and this is an average sort of a thing that we are talking about. Of course, these sort of include also what are called as students in school education, students in higher education, students at practically all ends. And of course, this is the documented figure that we are talking about. These are cases that come to the law. So cases which do not come to the law and cases which are not reported, we have no idea about that. For a simple reason, because being a student in India is definitely not the same as being a student in, say, for example, a developed country. So there's quite a possibility you might be registered for some course, some module, and maybe after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, you take a drop out of it and you don't carry on with it. You possibly don't attend classes, you possibly are not in the loop, and then maybe at some point of time you're dead. They're not going to register you as a student who is dead, despite the fact that you were registered as a student somewhere. Okay, so given the fact that you were not regular to your classes, to your courses, you automatically are seen as somebody who is not exactly speaking a student. So people keep on moving in and out as far as the systems are concerned, and as a reason why, despite the fact that you might be dead with something which has a clear connection to the fact that you are not able to pursue your studies, you won't be recorded as a case of a student suicide. Okay, so there's a difficulty at that end. But nevertheless, you do have 13,000. It's the huge number. The largest number of them are definitely what are called as students coming from the disadvantaged communities, and for a whole host of reasons. So some of it is definitely connected to what is called as discrimination. And yet we have this wonderful attitude which says is that कि सर नहीं, ये अभी आजकल की दुनिया में ऐसा नहीं होता है, वो पहले वाले जमाने में होता था, पर आजकल ऐसा नहीं होता है, हम बहुत सुधर गए हैं, whatever that means. So along the way, you had these two prominent suicides, and the mothers, as far as these two kids are concerned, Payal and Rohit, they're like lower middle class people. Actually, Payal's mother though is much more poorer than that. And now, with the death of their kids, left with a certain sort of idea in mind that जो हमारे बच्चों के साथ हुआ वो किसी और के बच्चों के साथ नहीं होना चाहिए. And they have been trying to fight it at different levels in terms of trying to create the necessary mechanisms to see to it that no other kids go about being treated in this manner, and no other kids should be pushed into this sort of a crisis, wherein the only thing that they can think about is killing themselves. They have been pursuing this with the law for quite some period of time, okay, including the Supreme Court of India. सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने सितंबर 2025 में यूनियन गवर्नमेंट से ये पूछा कि ये जो दो औरतें मांग कर रही है अबाउट दिस होल प्रॉब्लम रिलेटेड टू social discrimination in higher education in India, what exactly is the government doing about it? Okay, now just keep the trajectory of all of this very clearly in mind. So the court asks the government as to what is the government doing about social discrimination in higher educational institutions. Okay, this is very clear in the context of two mothers who are petitioners with the court who come from a disadvantaged caste and a disadvantaged tribe. The union government informs the Supreme Court that, well, we are working on a set of regulations which would be very soon made public. So first they go about making the draft rules public. And the draft is opened up for all manner of communication, comments, feedback, everything. And then in January 2026, 12th of January to be more specific, the union government goes about notifying the regulations, saying that this is what regulations 2026 about discrimination in higher education institutions is all about. And this is what we now intend to be the larger framework within which this issue would be addressed. Okay. People who have looked at the regulations have been sort of, especially in the light of the demonstrations and the protests that started, sort of been taken aback by the fact कि draft जो release किया गया था 2025 में सुप्रीम कोर्ट के instructions के बाद, उस draft में एक बहुत specific provision था about what is called as addressing false complaints. So there's this whole problem that if at all somebody makes a false complaint about discrimination, makes a false complaint about how he or she is being unfairly treated, then what exactly is it that the law should go about doing? So the 2025 regulations, the 2025 draft regulations did have a provision for what is called as false complaints. The 2026 notified regulations did not have anything about false complaints. So the false complaints part of the draft regulations was completely cleared off when the regulations were notified in January 2026. So ये जो problem था जो लोगों ने create किया by coming out on the streets and demonstrating, again something which said that पर hypothetically सोच के देखो कि मैंने तो कुछ किया नहीं है पर उसने मेरे खिलाफ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का चार्ज लगाया है. Now this could have been easily addressed had you taken that false complaint wala thing into consideration and had you carried on with it in the notified regulations which were already there in the draft. No idea about why was it dropped. Okay, so nobody is privy to this. Now it's obvious that if it has been dropped, there was some amount of debate and discourse around it in the Ministry for Human Resources Development when the regulation was notified that this needs to be dropped. Okay, so कुछ तो इसके बारे में डिबेट हुआ है, कुछ तो इसके बारे में बात हुआ है कि जिसके बाद ये तय किया गया है कि सर इसको ड्रॉप करना है. ये डिबेट क्या था, ये डिस्कशन क्या था, nobody has any understanding of it. Was it like impulsive that this was just thought at some bureaucratic level? No, we need to take away the false complaints wala thing because it doesn't seem good. So what exactly was the reason because of which this false complaints part of the draft was cleared off when the draft was notified in 2026? Nobody is speaking about it. Okay, but if you take all of that into consideration and then if you take the speed with which things went about happening, so January 2026, the government notifies it. Then ekdam possibly as some sort of lightning effect, you have universities and colleges wherein upper caste students start protesting against it. शक के लिए काफी गुंजाइश है because protest जो है वो North India में शुरू हो गए. In places like Lucknow, in places like Allahabad, जो बहुत spurious जगह है. मतलब आज की तारीख में अगर आप भारत में क्वालिटी हायर एजुकेशन के बारे में सोच रहे हो, लखनऊ, इलाहाबाद आर नॉट एग्जैक्टली स्पीकिंग एट द टॉप ऑफ योर माइंड. ओके, ऑफ कोर्स एट सम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम बोथ प्लेसेस वर फैबुलस, देयर इज नो डाउट अबाउट इट. इलाहाबाद यूनिवर्सिटी तो वाज आउट ऑफ दिस वर्ल्ड. इट एट सम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम वाज considered to be one of the best universities at par with some of them in the UK. when the British were around. आज की तारीख में Allahabad University is a good place to start a political career from. Not what is called as anything about higher education. So आप Allahabad University जाते हो ताकि मे बी आगे जाके आप पार्षद, विधायक, सांसद ऐसा कुछ ना कुछ बन सको, कम से कम कोशिश कर सको. नहीं हो गया, किसी को जानो जो ऐसा कुछ बना है. So Allahabad University is now famous for those types of things. Quality higher education. The protest did not happen in any of the known geographies of better higher education in India. So the protest did not start in the southern universities and colleges, which are slightly better as compared to the northern ones. Of course, the entire situation of higher education in India across the country is great, fabulous. So I needn't dwell on it at all. कि वो कितना गया गुजरा किस्म का कंडीशन है. वो गलगोटिया का कुत्ता जो है ना, वो काफी है सबको समझाने के लिए कि आपके हायर एजुकेशन का हाल जो है ना, वो कितना खूबसूरत है. सो नोबडी नीड्स टू गो ओवर देयर. You have islands of excellence in a sea of absolute desperation, absolute desolation. So some institutes, some departments, some better off sort of courses and modules, some good doing students and academics, some good sort of teamwork, but all of this is very haphazard. All of this is sort of something that happens in bits and pieces. Overall, the picture is pretty dispiriting and very discouraging. But it's very interesting कि इसके खिलाफ का जो protest है, वो ये सदर्न या वेस्टर्न यूनिवर्सिटीज और कॉलेजेस में शुरू नहीं होता है. ये शुरू होता है इलाहाबाद में, ये शुरू होता है लखनऊ में, ये शुरू होता है इन द गैंजेटिक वैली, वेयर द क्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशन इज डेफिनेटली नॉट ऑल दैट वेरी ग्रेट. ओके, nobody goes, you're a Tamil student, you're a Maharashtrian student, you're a student from Andhra. आप ये नहीं कहते हो कि मेरे जिंदगी में मेरा जो एम्बिशन है is to become a graduate of Lucknow University. No, nobody does that. Nobody does that even in Lucknow. Forget everything else. लखनऊ में भी कोई ऐसा नहीं कहता है. अगर आपसे कोई आपके 12th स्टैंडर्ड में पूछे कि बेटा एम्बिशन क्या है, कौन से इंस्टीट्यूट से हायर एजुकेशन का डिग्री लेके प्रोसीड होना चाहते हो, कौन से यूनिवर्सिटी जाना चाहते हो, यू वुड नेम द IITs एंड द IIMs. You would name some of the more interesting places in southern India, western India, some of them in the Delhi region. You would name Lucknow University. लखनऊ यूनिवर्सिटी में इसके खिलाफ का प्रोटेस्ट शुरू हो गया. दैट शुड टेल यू इनफ इन टर्म्स ऑफ ये कितना स्टेज मैनेज था. तो वो फॉल्स कंप्लेंट्स वाला जो किस्सा है, जो ड्राफ्ट से हटा दिया गया जब रेगुलेशंस को नोटिफाई किया गया, वो शायद हरकत की ही इसलिए गई थी ताकि देयर शुड बी अ सर्टेन सॉर्ट ऑफ पब्लिक प्रोटेस्ट अगेंस्ट दिस. द मैटर शुड गो टू द कोर्ट्स, and the courts, being headed by the sort of great people that they are, should dismiss it off in the way in which they have dismissed it off. Ekdam, you can perfectly sense it कि all of this was possibly very well planned. कि ना रहेगा बास, ना बजेगी बांसुरी, ना कुछ होगा, सिंपल इसको रफा दफा कर देते हैं and let's get done with it. Okay, which is sad, which is very very sad. इससे ज्यादा सैड शायद कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता है. बट आर दे सीरियस अबाउट, एंड ऑफ कोर्स देन दैट होल टॉक ऑफ द यूनियन HRD मिनिस्टर एंड द UGC is trying to divide the country along lines of caste, which was like, ये कहने के पहले भांग पिया था या भांग पी के ही पैदा हुआ था. The HRD and the UGC is trying to divide the country on the basis of caste by using these regulations. What world do you live in? Don't you know you're already divided on the basis of caste? You don't need a set of UGC regulations to go about dividing you on the basis of caste. You are already a caste stratified society. Look around you, you can feel it, smell it, sense it, taste it in the air. गैस सिलेंडर खत्म हो गया, लोगों को वड़ा पाव की पड़ी है. Nobody is talking about खीमा पाव over here. कोई कबाब की बात नहीं कर रहा है, कोई चिकन की बात नहीं कर रहा है. लोगों का सारा प्रॉब्लम जो है कि डोसा नहीं मिलेगा, वड़ा पाव नहीं मिलेगा. But that's enough to tell you as to what is your problem as far as discrimination in this country is concerned. Caste is all around you. Caste comes with stratification. Caste is about division. You breathe caste, you live caste, you are born in caste, you live in caste, you die in caste, you marry in caste, you reproduce in caste, you reproduce caste. You do everything in terms of caste. You don't need the UGC to come up with this. A whole manufactured sort of anger against मोदी जी ने ये क्या किया, धर्मेंद्र प्रधान ये क्या कर रहा है, सब आपके ही लोग हैं. प्रधान साहब अच्छे खासे ब्राह्मण है. That is the reason why the Hindu came up with something like this. I am horrified. सब कुछ एकदम प्रॉपर वेल सॉर्ट ऑफ प्लान्ड किस्म का नौटंकी लग रहा है. Then it goes to the Supreme Court, a wonderful sort of institution which is mostly made up of people who are upper caste. अच्छा, ये सारा बवाल शुरू हो गया बिकॉज कोर्ट ने गवर्नमेंट से कहा कि कुछ करो इसके बारे में. मामला जब फिर से कोर्ट गया तो चीफ जस्टिस सेड these regulations are possibly not in tune with what is required. They are possibly कुछ ज्यादा ही आगे निकल गए हैं. अच्छा, ये वही चीफ जस्टिस साहब है जिनको वो पहले वाले चीफ जस्टिस जो थे, जिनका नाम धनंजय चंद्रचूड़ है, उन भाई साहब ने एक हैंडबुक बनाया था अबाउट हाउ शुड बेंचेस अक्रॉस इंडिया, I'm talking about judicial benches, talk, report and document what is called as gender as far as judicial proceedings are concerned. So what are the right words which you should be using, what are the right terms which you should be using when you have a gender matter to be disposed of by the courts, which would reflect changed sensitivities and sensibilities of the times in which we live in. Justice Suryakant comes in and says, ये जेंडर हैंडबुक जो है ये हार्वर्ड मेड है and possibly isn't in sync with Indian reality, and he sets it aside. Are you getting it? So much about running a judiciary in a composite, plural, complex country like India in the 21st century. So the same man who sets aside the gender handbook saying this that नहीं, ये हार्वर्ड मेड है, ये इंडियन रियलिटी के साथ जेल नहीं करता है, is also the man who sets aside the UGC regulations saying this that no, they possibly are something that go ahead of the sort of problem that they were supposed to address in the first place, and hence we are asking that they be left in abeyance. In the meantime, the discrimination on the campuses can go on in the way in which it goes on. We have documented cases. We need not go very far off. करने वाले almost इतने Israel inspired है. To those of you who might be knowing when we had talked about it, जैसे गाजा में इजराइल ने जो कुछ भी किया पैलेस्टीनियंस के खिलाफ, in terms of killing them, in terms of raping them, in terms of humiliating them, उसको रिकॉर्ड भी किया अपने फोन्स पे और उसको अपलोड भी किया. कुछ वैसा ही आलम है इन द हायर एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूट्स ऑफ इंडिया, वेयर इन अपर कास्ट स्टूडेंट्स गो अबाउट वेल डॉक्यूमेंटिंग all sorts of episodes where they heckle, humiliate, trouble, harass put down students coming from the Dalit, the tribal, the OBC categories. You have well documented cases. They are absolutely available. ये रिकॉर्ड ये महान लोग जनरेट ही इसलिए करते हैं ताकि सर अगला कोई भी अगर इलेक्शन आ जाए तो पार्टी को दिखा सके कि देखो हम कितने काम करते हैं, हमको एक टिकट दे ही देना आप, कि फलाना फलाना केस में you had Dalit students, you had OBC students, you had minority students who had taken out some agitation, कोई जुलूस निकाला था, कुछ किया था, तो हमने कैसे जाके उनको मारा, पीटा, तोड़ा, गाली गलौज किया, उनके साथ झगड़ा किया. लोग ऐसी चीजों को डॉक्यूमेंट करते हैं, उसको वो पब्लिकली रिकॉर्ड करते हैं, अपने सोशल मीडिया फीड्स में उसको ऐड करते हैं. लोग चाहते हैं कि दुनिया इसे देखे, सराहे. बबुआ अपनी जाति के लिए क्या गुल खिला रहा है, ताकि आगे जाके अगर कभी वक्त आए, आपको टिकट को कोई चांस अगर हो जाता है, and everyone knows as to who are these people who are going to go about awarding you with a ticket for any election. तो ऐसा ना हो कि हम अपनी तारीफ खुद किए जा रहे हैं बिना किसी एविडेंस के. सर एविडेंस है ना. This is the normal state of affairs. There is all sorts of discrimination. Some of it is blatant in your face. Some of it is pretty subtle and nuanced that you have got to be really careful and cautious about it to realize that it's happening against you. And of course, as usual, you would feel it for a simple reason, because you are the target of it. So as that old one goes, no point asking Nazi Germany whether the Jews are being discriminated against. If you want to know whether the Nazis are discriminating against the Jews, you will have to ask the Jews. You don't ask the Nazis about it. वो जितना ओपन लॉजिक है ना उसका, कि अगर जूस के खिलाफ कुछ कर रहे हैं नाजीज, तो आप नाजीज से नहीं पूछते हो कि नहीं मैं आपके यहाँ पे जूस का अच्छा चंगा तो चल रहा है. नहीं, आपको जूस से पूछना पड़ता है. ये वो वैसा वाला ही मामला है. If you are being discriminated against, you don't ask those who are discriminating against you. You ask those who are being discriminated against. And somehow or the other, these basic sort of things is what India seems to have had completely lost on. अच्छा, जिधर चला उधर चला, जहां से वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाना था वहां से वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट गया. सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने उसके खिलाफ जो पोजीशन लेना था वो पोजीशन लिया. We are sort of back to square one. So now if you have a problem with this, you have got to fall back on the guidelines of 2012. Okay. So despite the fact that we tried doing everything along the way in the last almost 10-15 years to sort of update this situation, bring it to a new sort of a level, we are back to that same old one of 2012. We are not moving any point beyond that. Okay. Was this law imperfect? It sort of was, but then all laws are imperfect. Perfection builds up as laws get implemented. Laws don't come with built-in perfections into them. अगर law बहुत ज़्यादा perfect है ना, तो शायद वो divine commandment है, वो law नहीं है. Laws, as things that evolve out of interactions between human beings, are supposed to be imperfect. Perfection is gradual, it keeps on evolving, it will happen as a law keeps on getting implemented and enforced, and along the way we are going to keep on perfecting it. Laws don't come with maiden perfections into it. It's as plain and simple as that. So ये imperfect था, इसमें कुछ चीजें थी, कुछ खामियां थी, कुछ problems थे, but nevertheless as compared to 2012, this was really better. And it was in sync with the times in which we are. It needed to be addressed. Now, why are we saying this needs to be addressed, and what exactly is this problem that we are hinting at and talking about? In most of the developing countries, you would find that there is more of a hunger for something that is called as good quality education. And the reason for that is the sort of economic transition that most of these countries are making. So what's happening is we are moving out of agriculture and other primary sector activities into more developed activities of the economy. Even farmers who make millions in any given calendar year know this for sure, that farming is not what I want my kids to be in. Farming is not what my kids are interested in, and farming is not something that the coming generations are made for. So I would like my kids to move out of farming into something that is called as regular salaried employment. So good quality jobs. But then if you want to access good quality jobs, the way to it goes through what is called as good quality education. And for most farmers in a country like India, जहाँ farms का average size जो है वो 2 hectares से कम है, 87% of all Indian farmers are owners of land which is less than 2 hectares or somewhere around 2 hectares. These are small farms. These are not at all big farms. Good quality education is important, but it should also be accessible and it should also be very affordable. So until and unless it's not affordable, until and unless it's not accessible, our kids cannot go about partaking of it. Accessibility essentially means that somewhere or the other close in the vicinity institute hona chahiye. And affordability obviously is we should be in a position to pay the fees for it out of the farm incomes which we are getting, which are anyway a very small dwindling lot. Okay, so the fundamental problem is across, and this is in India, but this is also what you can say is in Africa. This is also what is called as the condition in Southeast Asia, in so many other parts of the world, which can be categorized as the developing and the emerging economies. So in most of the developing and emerging economies, what you have is a certain sort of a situation which says this, that farming is not the future. Primary sector activities is not where we see our kids going any further. And what we need to do is make a break into all of this. And the only meaningful break that can be made is through what is called as good quality education. Okay, and hence the need to get into it. But then that is exactly where you sort of enter into a situation which is completely insurmountable. Just to give you a couple of examples. 45 central universities हैं इंडिया में. मैं बाकी किसी की भी बात ना करूं, तो ये जो state universities है, private universities है, forget them. I don't want to talk about them for a very simple reason, because the quality of their data is definitely not up to the mark. The central universities are model institutions which run according to the rules which are set by the central government for all higher education institutions in India. And they have to run according to those rules for a simple reason, because the government goes about paying for everything in them. 2023, so not very far off. When the union HRD minister is asked a question on the floor of the house कि ये जो central universities है, इनका SC, ST और OBC faculties का जो recruitment है, faculties का जो proportion है, उसका condition क्या है? So you have something called as allotted positions, you have something called as filled in positions, and then you have what is known as the vacant and the backlog positions. So you have vacancies which have not been filled in as late or as early as 2023. The union HRD minister informs the house 83% of ST category positions in central universities are vacant. 80% of OBC positions, OBC faculty positions in central universities are vacant. SC positions are filled close to something like 50%, which essentially means that almost 50% positions are vacant. But among all the three of them, it seems that it's only the SC positions which come very close. And close का मतलब ये कि 50% positions अभी भी vacant है. But as far as the ST and the OBC positions are concerned, 83 and 80% positions vacant है. Okay, मंडल 1989 में आया. 1993 में in the Indira Sahni case, the Supreme Court of India clearly mandated that no more dereservation as far as reserve category positions are concerned. The problem starts after that. And the problem acquires the sort of nature that it acquires into the 21st century in almost its first 25 years to the level to which it goes about acquiring. Okay, now among all these communities that we are talking about, the historically disadvantaged communities of India, there is a certain sort of awareness about the significance of education. Other than the OBCs, the SCs and the STs are really disadvantaged for a very simple reason, because they do not have much of an access to what is called as good quality agricultural land or good quality agricultural sort of outputs. So, खेती आपके livelihood का mainstay नहीं है. OBCs, to a certain extent, you can definitely say that yes, OBCs definitely do have access to agricultural land, do have access to what is called as primary sector economic activities, and that also is in some way or the other the mainstay of their existences. Okay, be it reserve category farmers, non-reserve category farmers, farming is under a lot of stress across the country. There is no point in me reiterating it. So for everyone, the first instinct is we have got to send the child to school. We have got to see to it that the kid keeps on getting a good education. In the last almost 2 decades, as far as school education is concerned, every sort of initiative has brought us around to the point where there is possibly near universal enrollment. So as far as schooling is concerned, enrollment rate almost 100% या उससे भी ज़्यादा है. So there are cases where enrollment rates 103% है, 104% है. And then there are cases wherein they are close to 97%, 98% and are close to 100%. So, and this is after all that we have done in terms of the last 20 years to see to it that kids go to school. Okay. Problem starts at the point at which school education gets over and the kid is supposed to make a transition from school education to what is called as higher education. Dropout rates are significantly higher. So one set of dropout rates increases as the kid starts closing on standard 10th and starts moving towards standard 11th and 12th. तो standard 11th पहला एक level है जहां पे आपके पास significant किस्म का dropout है. And standard 12 is the worst. So for a country which has near universal enrollment as far as school education is concerned, enrollment at the level of higher education just 25%. Now, of all kids who are passing out of school, mind you well, 100% kids are getting enrolled in schools. When it comes to making the transition from school to college, school to university, your rate becomes something like 25, 27. It doesn't go beyond that. The Modi government has an ambitious program that by 2035 it should become 50%. But then for that matter of fact, he had also said that by 2022 farmers' incomes are going to be doubled. So I no longer trust any of their numbers. For a simple reason, because मुझे ऐसा अनपार्लियामेंट्री लैंग्वेज नहीं इस्तेमाल करना चाहिए, पर आई कैंट थिंक ऑफ एनीथिंग बेटर. वो जानते ही नहीं है वो क्या बकवास कर रहा है, प्लेन एंड सिंपल. सो जब ये महान बात कही गई थी कि फार्मर्स इनकम डबल हो जाएगा, तो उस टाइम पे देयर वाज दिस ह्यूज डिबेट, इफ यू कैन रिमेंबर इट, where we were talking about is this A1 income that he's talking about, A2 income, which income is he exactly talking about? डेडलाइन खत्म हो गया, उसके बाद के 6 साल भी निकल गए अभी. अब फार्मर्स इनकम के डबलिंग बिबलिंग की, डबल के तो छोड़ी दो, अब किसी भी चीज की बात नहीं की जाती है. तो आई डोंट वांट टू टॉक अबाउट द मोदी गवर्नमेंट्स अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ मैथमेटिक्स व्हेन इट कम्स टू सेटिंग माइलस्टोन्स. They don't have a much of an understanding of it, and I can excuse them for it. So when he says that by 2035 we are going to double the enrollment rate, so 25 से हम उसको 50% तक लेके जाने वाले हैं. अच्छा, most developed countries में enrollment rates close to 2/3 होते हैं. So they come close to something like 70%, 75%. But at the same time, let's be very clear about it. Most developed countries go about providing a higher education to their kids in practically all the domains of human activity that you can think of. Are you getting it? So that's one of the reasons why they do have very impressive numbers when it comes to enrollment rates at the level of higher education. Look at Southeast Asian countries, you look at China, you look at Japan, you look at South Korea, जो हमारे peer countries है, for that matter of fact, 2/3, not one country where I can think of where the rate is less than 2/3. The more developed it is, the rate possibly closes on to something like 87 to 90%. So you look at South Korea, you look at Japan, वो पढ़ के क्या करेगा वो आप छोड़ दो, पढ़ेगा इतना तो तय है, तो यूनिवर्सिटी जाएगा, बच्चा यूनिवर्सिटी जाएगा, पढ़ेगा बढ़ेगा. द चाइनीज कम टॉप ऑफ माई माइंड विद दिस होल आइडिया कि वो पढ़ने के बाद क्या करता है. वो सवाल मत पूछो आप, वो थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट है, पर पढ़ने के लिए जाता यकीनन है. ऑफ कोर्स their systems are way too subsidized for a simple reason, because governments put in more money into it, way too well designed, and that's the reason why kids avail of a very higher level of higher education at a very higher of a very higher quality. That translates into more productivity and efficiency in the economy, more innovation, more patents, more copyrights, more IPR property, and that automatically makes an economy a more high value economy. Okay, so why is it that countries want people to go into higher education? Not because this is some sort of competitive sport, but for a simple reason, because there are tangible sort of benefits out of it as far as the performance of the economy is concerned. Well-educated societies are more stable societies, are more fair-minded societies, are more egalitarian societies. Social strife कम रहता है, social stability and harmony ज़्यादा रहता है. The country that comes immediately to mind is something like Singapore. These are sort of the benefits of having good, decent quality higher education. So there are more pluses out of it rather than minuses. You can't think of any situation wherein you can say this that नहीं वो एजुकेशन के लिए तो गया पर उसका नुकसान ही ज्यादा हुआ. ओके, एजुकेशन रूइंड माई लाइफ, दैट इज गुड ऑन टी शर्ट्स, पर ये टी शर्ट पे डालने वाला बंदा जो है वो आपको इंडिया में ही नजर आएगा, एंड उससे बड़ा अनपढ़ शायद आपको इस दुनिया में कोई नहीं मिलेगा. For sure. Okay, of course, in a new sort of setting with especially the sort of new age technologies that we have access to, there's a huge question of institutionalized higher learning. So with AI becoming the sort of thing that it is becoming, with machine learning becoming the sort of race that it is becoming, the most important question that most developed economies are now asking themselves: is it really necessary to go to university for all of this? And especially the argument is along the lines of, in most of the Western cases, most higher education is paid for out of the pocket. It's not something that is heavily subsidized by the state. So the Chinese or the South Korean states will put in money into it. Some European countries will put in money into it. But the best examples in the Western world, America, Britain, well, they don't put in much money out of their pockets. They call in for most of the money out of the students' pockets. And most students, at least since COVID-19 restrictions closed in 2022, are increasingly having that problem. Is university education absolutely necessary? What are we paying for when we are paying for a degree? And this, don't forget it, in the situation wherein, in the American case, student debt, that is the money that students have incurred as debt in the process of acquiring a degree of higher education, close to $1 trillion. Close to $1 trillion. For some understanding of size, the Indian economy size is close to $4 trillion. When Joe Biden was a president, he did have a plan to significantly slash the student debt. But then when Trump went to the White House, this plan was completely cancelled out. And of course, मतलब उसका जो भी वेस्टेज बचा था उसको भी कैंसिल आउट किया गया. इस प्लान को स्ट्राइक डाउन अमेरिकन फेडरल सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने किया, ये कहते हुए कि ये एक मॉरल हजार्ड है and we cannot encourage this. This should not be encouraged at all. So the idea that the federal government out of public money will pay for student debt. So ये $1 trillion वाला student debt जो है, ये घट के approximately $600 billion के आसपास आ जाएगा. The Supreme Court's argument was they knew what they were signing up when they contracted that loan. They very well knew. Now you trying to push this into public funding, कल को वो जाके कुछ भी पड़ेगा, उसके लिए कुछ भी कहां से भी कुछ भी पैसा उठाएगा. You can't say that this money should come out of public funds. Now, is this a right thing to do, wrong thing to do? That is different. But now the most important debate that we have, especially in the American and the British cases, is this really worth it? You contract a loan, you go and do your studies, you end up in a job market wherein you possibly are getting a job which is nowhere close to paying any of this debt back. Even if you get one, you're possibly going to spend the next 25-30 years repaying the student loan itself, by the time of which your life would almost be done. So is this good enough? Should this be done? Especially in a world wherein high-paying entry-level jobs of the variety which existed before COVID-19 no longer in existence. अच्छा, ये सब इंडिया में बात करना बहुत ज्यादा डेंजरस है, जहां पे लोग फिराक में ही है लोगों को स्कूल से या कॉलेज से बाहर निकालने के लिए. They just want people to be thrown out. You should be looking at the laws to understanding in how many situations can you actually as a student be rusticated and be thrown out of the courses into which you have signed into, to know as to how scary the situation is. So, I don't want to invoke that debate in our case, but nevertheless, even in our case, somehow or the other, we do have a similar sort of situation. Okay, wherein the whole idea is, this is really worth it. So that famous thing जो डेविड कैमरून ने कहा था 2010-11 के आसपास, कि एग्जैक्टली कितने लोगों की जरूरत है कि जो शेक्सपियर के प्लेस पे पीएचडी करेंगे. How many people do we really want who would end up doing doctoral and research work on Shakespearean stage and theatre? And how many people do we seriously need? So this whole idea of what is it that the market needs, what is it that you're learning, what is it that you're spending money on, and what is the applicability of everything that you're learning? Why can't we have more what is called as STEM graduates? This is what Cameron was hinting at. STEM is, I hope people are aware of that, science, technology, engineering, mathematics wala. So we need more STEM graduates instead of people doing Shakespeare study. Black Shakespeare, blue Shakespeare. कितना शेक्सपियर पढ़ेंगे और क्यों पढ़ेंगे हम? आ रहे समझ में? Wonderful. Try thinking about this. So, the whole problem in the Indian context is, if you look at the vacancies at the central universities, as far as the historical disadvantaged communities are concerned, these are mandatory positions. This will have to be filled. And if they are not getting filled, it automatically means you are ejecting out students out of the process of higher education. And the only reason why somebody would be thrown out from that position is because somebody is not in a position to bear things beyond a level. रोहित वेमुला right top of the list. दोनों भी, रोहित वेमुला और ये पायल तड़वी, दोनों का भी केस जो है ना, वो साइंस एजुकेशन से रिलेटेड है. They are not into what is called as social sciences and humanities. And in the STEM, medicine, management, finance streams, the discrimination against students coming from the historically disadvantaged communities is the severest. Your teachers can point blank tell you in your face, कुछ नहीं होने वाला तेरा, कुछ नहीं, क्योंकि जिस कोर्स में तूने एडमिशन लिया है ना, उस कोर्स को हम चलाने वाले हैं. The entire system of grading and assessment is an internal system. It's we who are going to decide as to how many marks are you going to get. So अगर हमने आपसे ये कहा है कि आपका कुछ नहीं होने वाला, उसका सीधा मतलब ये है, we are going to see to it that you leave, and if you don't, we are not going to grade you. And if anyone thinks that after the regulations, they were hypothetically going to create cases, बहुत हाई क्वालिटी का वीड पी रहा है वो, बहुत ही हाई क्वालिटी का. It's just not aware of how disastrous the condition is in the present itself. So on one hand is a government which wants to push in for more enrollment, which wants more students to get educated. On the other hand are institutions manned and run by people who are busy getting students out. And somewhere in between, the Galgotia Kutta as a best face of this story. Most OBC communities in India, and they don't shy from saying it, you do have people saying it in so many words, are communities which were traditionally connected with the development of Indian arts and crafts. So they have some very excellent sense in terms of how can you be innovative and creative. The simple problem is lack of credit, lack of capital, lack of access, lack of platforms, lack of connectivities. So जब तक वो प्राड़ा वाले कोल्हापुरी पहन के इधर उधर नहीं घूमे, तब तक how many people in the Indian social media sphere knew of Kolhapuri in connection with chappals? There's a question worth asking in this country, which nobody asks. I hope people are aware of the Prada Kolhapuri Rao. अगर नहीं मालूम है ना, तो नजदीकी दुकान से कोल्हापुरी उठाने का, अपने सर पे मारने का. You deserve that. Maybe any one of you within your soul feels that, no, but I don't know what this is all about. Amazon पे जाओ, एक कोल्हापुरी ऑर्डर करो और खुद के सर पे पीटो, तब जाके कुछ होगा आपका. Are you getting that? So you have a simple problem. You have people who are creative. You don't need the Galgotia Kutta controversy. But the simple problem is, these are not kids who have any access to credit, capital, connectivities, platforms, nothing. If they are at all, their teachers do everything possible. Their teachers, their friends, the general ecosystem does everything possible to push them out. Keep out. All that we are left with is to go back and do those plain vanilla BA BCom courses, जो बहुत pointless है. BCom तो एक completely non-existent किस्म का stream of education है. दुनिया में इंडिया के अलावा किधर भी लोग बीकॉम नाम का कुछ भी नहीं पढ़ते हैं. बीकॉम एक फ्रॉड है, एक बहुत बड़ा फ्रॉड है. What people learn under that stream that is called as BCom has already been in most of the other parts of the world absorbed into something that is called as studying administration or management. We are the only fabulous country which yet awards degrees in something very fraudulent which is called as BCom. I don't know why do they call it non-existent. I keep telling the BCom people, non-existent stream है तुम्हारा, कोई अहमियत नहीं है इसकी. म्हणजे हॅपी काय करतो भाई बीकॉम? अरे काही नाहीये, काहीही नाहीये. बीकॉम नावाची कुठलीच गोष्ट अस्तित्वात नाही या जगामध्ये. काय करणार सर? आमच्या काळात आमच्याकडे दुसरं काय नव्हतं, आम्हाला कुणी काय सांगितलं नाही, काय करणार आम्ही? मग बीकॉम करायला गेलो, नाही तर मग माणसं बीए करायला जातात. अजून एक महान अभ्यासक्रम आहे, त्याच्यात काय करतात त्यांना असो. एनिवे, असं कुणाचं शिक्षण काढू नये, पण अवस्थाच इतकी छान आहे. एनिवे, आय होप यू आर गेटिंग व्हॉट आय एम ट्राइंग टू पुश फॉर. सो देर इज नो पॉइंट इन सेइंग that there is no discrimination in this country. There is a massive amount of it. It's all over the place. It's sapping at our creativities. It's sapping at the productivity and the efficiency of the economy. We are an imitative economy, not an innovative one. So we can imitate anything and everything that the world does. We do not innovate. And we don't innovate for a very simple reason, because those who are capable of innovation do not have the opportunities of doing so. So how good is this? I don't know. I just don't know. Should it be there? It definitely should be. उनमें से एक का भी पोजीशन ये नहीं था कि we will ensure that there would be no discrimination. They were all imagining situations in which no, but they can weaponize it against us. तुमको मालूम नहीं है, ऑलरेडी एंटी डाउरी लॉज ने करके दिखाया है. एक तो शादी होती नहीं है, ऊपर से हो गई तो ये मुसीबत है. And this not because this just because of the fact that the law is in existence. So you should take away the law. Would you like to live in that sort of a situation if you have if you have a daughter or a sister who is being discriminated against? सर आप हाइपोथेटिकल बातें कर रहे हो. फिलहाल मेरा प्रॉब्लम मेरी बहन या मेरी बेटी के साथ कोई डिस्क्रिमिनेशन कर रहा है ये नहीं है. मेरा प्रॉब्लम मेरी बीवी मेरे को परेशान कर रही है, वो है. आप उसको एड्रेस करने के बजाय आप हाइपोथेटिकल किस्म की बातें किए जा रहे हो. So they already have that problem. And is there caste in Indian education? It's huge. Simply huge. Small things. Try going back and thinking very calmly every single thing that your teachers have told you in class, in different sorts of classes, in different sorts of courses. At what level was there a sense of caste embedded in it? Is something that you won't even realize until and unless you don't start thinking very objectively of it. किसको कितने मार्क्स मिलते हैं, खास करके in all sorts of internal assessments where there is no blind sort of objectivity which is at play. Why does it happen when kids, a certain sort of kid gets a certain sort of marks in the class? Somehow or the other, there is something similar about the teacher and the kid. In terms of their social background, in terms of their social identities. They might come from the same villages. They might come from the same caste. They might have a very powerful sort of religious affinity. Some strand of identity is common in a situation wherein a teacher feels that a certain student is more deserving as compared to a certain other student. We have all lived with these types of situations. No point at all in terms of believing or pretending पता नहीं आप क्या बात किए जा रहे हो. We all know of these types of situations. We all know at some point of time or the other, we have all faced all of this. I don't know Janvi for a simple reason because her question is, if except few this law is a good version, then why did the former UGC chairman Sukhdev Thorat also deny the implementation of this law? The fundamental problem as far as most people on the opposite side are concerned, the historically disadvantaged communities, the one problem with this law which they had is there was a lot in this law which was not clear. It was very vague. So there's a concept in the regulations of 2026 that talk of something that is called the equity squads. Now we know for sure that all sorts of internal mechanisms that institutions have of addressing discrimination, you have a lot of them. So you have institutions dealing with discrimination at the level of admission and fees. You have discrimination related to gender, sexual abuse. You have discrimination related to caste, which is addressed by the SC/ST grievance cells. So most institutes of higher education have at least 3 or 4 different panels that deal with what is called as different sorts of discrimination. Okay. And I don't know if you have any idea in terms of how managed are these committees, how managed and staged is the working of all of this, and how most of the time it is futile to complain to any one of them. Okay. So you bring in a case of discrimination, you bring it to any of these committees, and one of the first things that the committees go about doing is to find out as to जिसका नाम आपने लिया है उसका standing क्या है. If he is like somebody who is higher up in the pecking order, someone who is very influential, then the first instinct is to try finding out as to, are you somebody who is habituated to speaking lies? Going in front of these committees, trying to get any justice out of them is a very difficult thing. Most of the time, the entire show is completely managed. As a student, my interaction with the institute is a very small one. मेरे आने के पहले भी इंस्टीट्यूशन था, मेरे जाने के बाद भी इंस्टीट्यूशन अपनी जगह पे बरकरार रहने वाला है. So you're almost threatened with that whole idea that somehow or the other, maybe it wasn't exactly what you felt it was. It was possibly something different. So they try convincing you कि आपको शायद वहम हुआ है कि आपके खिलाफ किसी किस्म का अन्याय हुआ है, आपकी गलतफहमी है. इतना बड़ा आदमी आप देखो, वो आपके खिलाफ क्यों अन्याय करेगा? We have tons of those types of cases where institution heads are completely absolved of all charges of wrongdoing. You have worst cases, caste wale to aap chhod hi dijiye. You have worst sort of approaches when it comes to sexual abuse wale cases. Why would he do it? He's somebody who's so big and powerful. वो इतना वेल कनेक्टेड है, इतना उनका प्रेजेंस है as far as international forums and all of this is concerned. Why would he do it? And yet you have some of India's best academics who have had seen their academic careers come to a close because of sexual abuse charges being brought against them. And yet time and again the argument persists. इतना बड़ा आदमी क्यों करेगा ऐसा? आपको कोई गलतफहमी हुई है that this is what he tried to do with you. That's the same argument that Asaram Bapu also makes. That's a different story. So the problem is, for most people on the opposite side, this law is vague as far as a lot of provisions are concerned. And with the working of the present committees being what it is, adding one more equity committee to the show, which is more or less exactly structured and supposed to function in the same way as most of the other grievance committees as of now are working, was like a complete non-starter. We were never going to go anywhere further with this. And hence, for people like Dr. Thorat, the problem is that this law possibly doesn't go to the point to which it should go. It's possibly not at all making the sort of big break which it should be making. Though it did promise that it is supposed to make a big break. So I don't know, for most of them on the opposite side, the fundamental problem with this law was जितना दूर वो जाना चाहिए या जितना radical changes उसमें लाने चाहिए, वो करने की कोशिश नहीं कर रहा है. It's again becoming another wagon to that a whole train of the different grievance cells that we have as far as most of these institutions are concerned. So you have an SC/ST cell, you have a women's and sexual abuse wala cell, you have a cell dealing with malpractices and admission, you have cells dealing with overt discrimination as far as disabilities. So many of these cells. And adding one more by calling it an equity cell. Actually, they had a very spurious thing in it, which was called the equity squads. How were they supposed to function on the campuses? What role were they supposed to have? There was no clarity on that. Hence, for most people on the opposite side, the point was, we need a big breakthrough. We need something that is going to completely smash it off. And this one doesn't go all the way till there. वो जाने की कोशिश कर रहा है पर उधर तक जा नहीं रहा है. And that's the reason why it had to be like sort of opposed at the level at which these people opposed it. Are you getting that? But one can understand that. That's coming from a different end altogether. But जो opposition लखनऊ यूनिवर्सिटी वालों से आया, वो उसका कैलिबर ही अलग है. कैलिबर भी अलग है, उसका कैटेगरी भी अलग है.